Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome all of you to Thornton Vietnam collaborated webinar, Business Pandemic Resilience Diagnostic. My name is Truy Pham, a senior consultant at Digital Advisory Team of Thornton Vietnam, and thank you for your participation. We hope that the seminar will bring valuable insight to you and practical information to your businesses in this time of difficulty. So, you know that this year the pandemic of COVID-19 struck the global economy, and Vietnam is certainly not an exception. And to help Vietnam businesses and the market to cope with this challenge, in September 2020, Digital Advisory Team at Thornton Vietnam, in partnership with Enablecode and TRG, have released the Pandemic Resilience Diagnostic Survey report. And we are very pleased to have our expert to join with us today. First, we have Mr. Claude Spiese. He is the Senior Advisor of Digital Advisory Services at Thornton Vietnam, who is also the mastermind of PPRD survey. And to join with Mr. Claude today, I would like to introduce Mr. Rick Ivanovic, the co-founder and the CEO of TRG International. And we have Mr. Colin Blackwell, the co-founder and the CEO of Enablecode. We have Mr. Anton Sirot, he is the CEO of PhD Management. And then lastly, we have Dr. Bukhar Straj. He is the management professor at RMIT University, Vietnam. Right. So here's the agenda we have today. In the beginning, Mr. Claude will provide you with a brief introduction to the PPRD survey results. Then our guest speaker here will talk about Vietnam market insights beyond the survey results. And then after that, our expert will discuss further in the panel sessions in which contribute more understanding and our findings about the business pandemic resilience. Then in the panel discussion of the webinar, we'll also spend some time for the Q&A sessions where you can submit your questions to the Q&A box, and then I will forward that to the panel so that we can have a very interactive discussions. Or if you want to follow up with us via email, please send an email to grant.thornton@vn.gt.com. And last but not least, to wrap it up, recommendations for Vietnamese businesses were also provided in this webinar by Mr. Claude. Okay, now to get it started, I would like to welcome Mr. Claude to continue on the presentation to the PPRD results and findings. Mr. Claude?
Let me start by introducing Chi, our moderator today. So he joined Grant Thornton earlier this year and worked together with me the whole way to make this pandemic diagnostic, to do the survey and to do the results. And he has a lot of firsthand experience, more than most of us, about dealing with the pandemic. He was caught overseas in the USA, wasn't able to return to Vietnam. And then he finally got back, and then he went through the quarantine. And he was even on television about that experience. So he knows a little bit about being resilient. So thanks very much for moderating today, Chi. And I'll get started.
Thank you, Mr. Claude.
Okay, just a little bit about myself. My specialization is mostly in banking and finance. I've been in Vietnam for consulting for over 20 years. So now I'm building the digital advisory practice here at Grant Thornton Vietnam. We've been working on this survey for several months, and we're happy to give an overview of the results of what the survey found out for us. Next slide, please. Okay, so we sent out a survey online. People filled it out, and then we gave a general report, which I'm going to present to you. And then for those who filled it out, we gave individual reports. We benchmarked individual businesses against their industry and sent them the results and sent them the recommendations that were implied by those results. And I'll be going through all that as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so the results, we looked at 6 different factors: the effect of the pandemic on your business's supply, on your demand, on your people and labor, on external factors like regulations, on your liquidity and cash flow and your finances in general, and on your digital initiatives. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first we'll give a few examples of the results that we found out from the survey. Next slide, please. Okay, so for example, on the financial performance, we found only 20% had less than a 10% negative impact. So more than 90% had a substantial impact, including 28% had a 40% drop in their earnings. So that's a pretty big financial impact, completely unexpected out of the blue. Next slide, please. Okay, we looked at it by industry, and we found some variations whereby it seems like real estate was hit the hardest, and interestingly, retail, oh, there we are. Retail did the best, was the most resilient. Next slide, please. Okay, looking at company type, this is probably one of the slides that led to the most debate. We may talk about it on our panel. We found that state-owned were the most resilient, and publicly listed companies were the least resilient. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so not surprisingly, those companies which were digitally more mature were more resilient, and those which have not really started their digital journey, over on the left side, they were less resilient. Next slide, please. Okay, also a little bit interesting, we see an increase in resiliency the greater the work from home ability of the company, but it's not completely linear. For some reason, those that have too much work from home reported that they were less resilient. Next slide, please. Again, more to talk about during the panel. Okay, and then we asked people about how satisfied are you with your company's IT, and we found the same type of thing, that the more satisfied, the more resilient the companies were, up to a certain extent, and then it dropped off again at the very top. Next slide, please. Okay, now here's an example of the reports that we gave to each individual company. So these are not in the general report, but each company received one of these where we benchmark them against their industry. So for example, this company, they're generally not doing as well as their industry, but especially in supply. So we would make a recommendation to them, something like, you probably need to try to diversify your supply to make yourself more resilient. Next slide, please. Okay, then in the real estate industry, this particular company, they also were doing pretty much average, but they were not doing as well on digital. So this is an example. We would probably tell this company, you need to start your digital transformation journey. You're behind the rest of your industry. Next slide, please. Okay, in manufacturing processing, this company, we would have told them, you're pretty much on par with your industry, seem to be doing well managing your people, but there's still improvements that can be made, of course, but you're pretty much benchmarked against your industry. Next slide, please. And this particular company in the retail, we would say you're doing very well on the demand. We'd have to look more deeper why that is. It could be they have already mature online sales, but they're doing fine on the demand side, and pretty much average with their industry in all the other factors regarding their resilience. Next slide, please. Okay, this company in the technology industry, they don't have any problem with their supply. So again, we'd have to look more detail on this company, but it could be they are a local unit of an international company and their supply is secure, or it could be the opposite. Their supply was shut down from their parent company, and they're able to get it locally, so they're doing much better in supply. but otherwise they're doing pretty much the same as the rest of their industry. And lastly, okay, so we didn't have enough data to have like 20 different industries, so we just had those 6. So we threw everybody else in other, and then tried to make some sense out of, for each individual company, how they were doing. And this company basically is doing well compared to all the other miscellaneous companies in that group. Okay, so that gives you an idea of the report. I just went through that rather quickly to try to leave more time, because we have such interesting presentations from the rest of the panelists. Next slide, please. So I think we'll go ahead and turn it over to the panelists. Back to you, Chi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Claude. That was very informational. And again, to the audience, if you have any questions, please send to our Q&A box so that we can take time to answer your questions in the Q&A sessions. And now heading to the second sessions of Vietnam Market Insights based on the PPRD survey results. I would like to invite our guest speaker, and to begin, Mr. Colin Blackwell, to talk about business resilience, how to be business resilient. Mr. Colin?
Yes, certainly. Good morning, everybody. So next slide. Yeah, so just following on from those themes that Claude had mentioned. So we saw from the survey that companies that were the most agile and had transformed the most were most resilient in the pandemic. And just to add another layer to that from my own observations, so I was recently judging the Vietnam HR Awards, and we had a lot of the best companies in Vietnam presenting on how they'd navigated the COVID pandemic. And one thing that became very apparent was that those companies that were what we call modern, so they'd recently gone through quite an in-depth digital transformation, they were already agile, they were using ecosystem and platform approaches. Those companies actually gained market share, they accelerated their transformation and had a new HR logic when everything hit at the same time. So what COVID did to companies was, their markets downturn, they had to refit their factories, they had to redo their supply chains, they had to move down e-commerce channels, remote working, everything at the same time. And those modern companies were almost designed for that. Whereas the more traditional companies, which were using technology, but not as advanced as it could be, but certainly were very traditional in their hierarchical structures and their view of business, they really suffered during this pandemic. So in previous years, people like Rick and myself who were out there talking about transformation, and we were kind of wondering in 2019, is this something real? But 2020 really did prove it. So modern companies were designed for 2020. They did really well. So to explain a little bit further about the mechanisms of this, the survey gave us some great results to back this up. So next slide. Next slide. So here is just an example on how a company would approach its people resourcing. So the green squares here is if a company needs to expand, it would typically just take on more headcount or maybe give a task to a supplier. But a modern company would look at a far wider ecosystem. So could you partner with another business? Could you hire someone off the gig economy? Could you automate something? There's a number of different options. And if you actually thought about it, a lot of these other options, the ones in red, are more attractive actually in a volatile market. So in a volatile market where things can move very fast up or down, if you're flexible in your cost base, you're going to be far better off. If you have thousands of employees and your market turns down, your reaction speed is going to be slow and you're going to have losses. If on the other side, there's a technology jump and you could expand very fast, you'd miss out on it if you had to recruit in-house. So that's just an example. And so the best companies out there, people like Amazon, Facebook, are using exactly these modern ecosystems, and they've done so well as a result of this. Next slide. Next slide. So just how would this ultra agile world look like? So imagine if all of the things you did in your company, just try and put them into kind of like boxes of the nature of the task. So any repetitive task out there, something that's going to be happening regularly as part of your core business process. Now, about a very large amount of that you can automate. I mean, the technology is already there. It's more the human element of, can companies get their heads around actually and being brave enough to automate all of this? But just as a rough number, I mean, you could be looking at, let's say, half of all of the tasks in your company could go through that digital transformation to automate. And that's often a lot quicker and cheaper through, plug-in platforms than it ever was before. Any other repetitive tasks that take a little bit more cognitive thinking, human skills, those can be outsourced to a business partner. Then, what are specific project tasks? Now, if something is absolutely core to your company's unique selling proposition, so it's proprietary information or very confidential, that very core of your company can be employees. But even then, you could really push it to say, look, okay, we're not paying for people to sit in an office or at the other end of a screen. We're only paying for results. So you could have blockchain even contracts with the remaining employees only on results. And then if there's a more general task that could be put out to online marketplaces, it can be done remotely and anywhere. So if you're really forcing that kind of thinking on your company, you then get this ultra agile system. And this is already where someone like Amazon is already operating at. I've done quite a lot of work with them recently, and they don't have thousands of employees just sitting there. They don't have big offices. They are absolutely flexible on this kind of system. And that is why they do so well. This is already happening in the absolute leading companies out there. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So it's if you looked at those ratios, they automate 50%, outsource 20%, freelancer 20%, employees on blockchain 10%. If you look at how that would build together as an ecosystem, so the old way is, you'd have your own company, and then you'd have very defined, this one's a supplier, this one's a customer, this one's a competitor. In the more flexible way, the more agile way to respond to the very different, fast-moving client or market demand, you have these ecosystems. And it's only as a total ecosystem that a company is now strong enough to actually earn revenue out there on a more flexible customer demand as well. So you can imagine an old-fashioned company only looking at its own employees and trying to provide a competitive service on the market. It will lose contracts when faced with more agile competitors, and these could be from any country in the modern context, that are using a lower cost base through better automation and a better skill sets and specializations from a wide range of other partners. So it's that combined effort that then goes in to provide something more competitive to the market. So for example, a business partner could be a supplier, but that supplier would help you to win a contract because it's through the combined strength that you're good enough to beat out the competition. So it's a different kind of logic of this ecosystem. And if you look at, again, people like Amazon, SAP, Microsoft, they're using exactly this. They're going leading in with business partners, and they have become the biggest companies in the world, by visualizing exactly this kind of ecosystem. So next slide. Yeah, so if we kind of think about, what is happening out there. So change is scary, and a lot of people hesitate, and they're like, okay, the old way, it's tried and tested. We know what it is. Let's stick to that. But the pandemic speeded up change so fast that now it's not, safe to stand still, because you'd be standing still in the middle of busy traffic. So, don't be the bunny in this picture, frozen in the headlights of the oncoming transformation. If your competitors, your whole sector, your customers your country, everyone is moving on with this transformation, going towards AI and agile, the safest thing you can do is change. So psychologically, change is scary, yes, but not changing is even more scary in the current context. So this is, you know, an absolute survival choice these days for companies to move towards these much more modern structures. And so the survey results were exactly showing this, the same things. So agile companies, digitally transformed companies do better in a crisis. This has always been the case, but it's just, it was like a nice to have before. Now it is essential for survival. So that's really, next slide. Yep, so that was the last slide I had there. So yeah, basically, it's the survey was backing up some solid data on what we've observed with a number of these companies, let's say in the Vietnam context, in the HR awards as well. So I think other people will go into a little bit more detail of exactly what digital transformation means, but this was the overall context of why this is so important for companies to change and how the survey backed things up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Very powerful message. Okay, and now to continue with the presentations, I would like to invite Mr. Rick Ivanovic to talk about digitalization and the role of it in business resilience. Mr. Rick.
Thanks very much, Chi. So continuing on, Colin has set a great foundation, and we've seen that we're not going to eliminate people, that's for sure. Okay, there are certain tasks that cannot be eliminated. However, in one of his slides, he was showing that we need to automate these repetitive tasks, 50%. And there was another 20% being outsourced. So from a digital point of view, we're looking at 50 to 70% that's open for transformation. Next slide, please. So digital transformation we've seen is going to drive resiliency. That has been mentioned by both Colin and before that Claude made that very, very clear, is digital transformation is happening, okay? Obviously, one of the things that the diagnostic uncovered was really looking at how mature some of the companies are. And in the bigger world outside our diagnostic and the discussions that we've had with companies now interested in this, is their digital maturity is driving the speed at which that they can transform. Now, when we talk about digital transformation, we talk about all of these things on the screen, AI, you know, automation, networking, IoT, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but beyond that, what is digital really all about? And that's on the next slide, please. Digital is all about data. Now, that pretty picture, you know, what is that? That's actually a virtualized data lake. Okay, so that's a virtualization, a visualization of all the data in a company. Every single bit of digital data that they have on every server, on every computer has been indexed, and that's what it looks like. Okay, so this is what we're really talking about when we get into the bits and the bytes. Next slide, please. Yes, some people say we're in a crisis. Yes, we have this pandemic thing. But as the great Winston Churchill said, is never let a good crisis go to waste. And when we look at the Chinese characters of crisis, we know it means danger and opportunity. So what's that got to do with data? Next slide, please. Well, the danger of data is we have an awful lot of it. We have got data everywhere. You know, we're on a Zoom call at the moment, and all of this is being digitized. It's all out there on the internet. We all have mobile phones, smartphones. Every time we even touch it, even when we're not touching it, it's gathering and generating more and more data. And the more data that we have, the more problems that we have. So this is the danger or the negative side that some people may be perceiving things. This is the glass is only half full. And one of the problems with the data that we've seen through the diagnostic and the knock-on conversations we've had with organizations is data is becoming dirty. Okay, data is non-compliant. We have all sorts of cybersecurity issues and worries. Okay, and that was one of the things that the diagnostic track was looking, cybersecurity awareness and preparedness. And obviously, the larger and more global your company is, the more concerned we are with that, because we have regulations in all the different countries that we are operating in, like GDPR and stuff like that. And we're scared of any breaches. Okay, and there's so much data now. There's a big blurring of who's in charge of all this information. Okay, and some of us who are not digitally mature enough, we're not transforming yet. We're still stuck in our human silos. Okay, so we haven't broken out into those different sectors that Colin very eloquently identified for us. So that's the danger side, the negative side. Can we move on to the next slide, please? But what's the opportunity? The opportunity is we need to make sense of our data. And the more digitally mature companies, the ones that are embracing digital transformation, are making sense of their data. And as they do that, light bulbs go off and we can see we can monetize that data. There is value in that data. And that's why the companies such as Amazon and others who are making sense of their data are making big money out of their data. So the chances are that you folks on this call, you are sitting on lakes of data, and we can uncover some value for it for you. Other opportunities: protection, governance, compliance. Okay, there is a positive side for that. The glass is half full, and underpinning all of this is this whole world of AI and all the wonderful things that brings to us, which may sound like science fiction, but it's actually, as Colin said, it's not that science fiction anymore. Some of it is very, very plug and play. It's not as difficult as we think it is. Let's move on to the final slide, please. Next slide. And looking at the diagnostic and some of the things that are being faced by some of the organizations, these are some of the things that could instantly either get rid of their risk or bring that opportunity and uncover the value of what they have. And all of this, as Colin said, is actually plug and play. So thank you very much. Next slide.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rick. And now we'll have Mr. Antoine Sirot, the CEO of PhD Management, to bring some of his very realistic experience to share that would link with the PPRD survey results. Mr. Antoine.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'm here to a bit expose a base case of hospitality, and hospitality, as everyone can understand, has been very much affected by the COVID pandemic, and we really did have to take some steps to and quickly to face this crisis. So next slide. So we had to go through a process, and that's where there in our process, there's probably a lot of points that were presented by either Rick or Colin that are relevant to our hospitality. First is a step that we do normally in any case, forecasting business, organization expense, but the decision process was, let's say, more difficult in this situation, as there's a lot of unknown points that we had to face. So next slide. So forecasting business, we have to look at all opportunities in getting business when the country closed the borders. We know that some of our hotels properties were totally cut of potential customers or even regular customers. So we have to really find new opportunities, and the best opportunity, of course, was the domestic market. And looking at the domestic market and the response during this COVID crisis has been quite interesting. So we had to have a lot of information that we find in our past data, and also with the help of a ecosystem developed at our group level. So this is an eye-opener for us, that the domestic market was much more potential than we first used to think about, especially like Vietnamese, upper social end, not able to travel abroad, quarantined, returning expatriates. These are opportunities, and corporate events also were showing a good response from the market. In this, once you have a good forecast, you have to keep it realistic. Otherwise, you take greater risk of not having your system and your business organization adapted to a reduced business volume. So next slide. So we have to adapt our organization, and that was the most important for us and urgent. So we have some hotels that are city hotels, some are resorts, some are combining domestic market and international markets. Some were, let's say, relying on 80% of international market. With border closed, that was really challenging. So we had to take some decisions, and especially in hospitality, which is manpower incentive, we had to readjust our way to manage our human resources and our manpower. So for some hotels, we had to close the entire hotel and follow the entire staff. Then we reopened a few months later as a quarantine center for the hotel. And then we re-employ the people on a daily basis, but providing them a good incentive, for example, on their daily wage. A daily wage that was more than 30% above what they used to. So they didn't lose too much, and we had a good commitment from the employees at that time. We had to adapt also our operation with outsourcing, like food and beverage. We didn't reopen food and beverage in the hotel, but used outsourcing from various restaurants to do only delivery on site, for example. That was a very good, so outsourcing was one of, I noticed in Colin's presentation. We had to adjust also the days at work for some properties where we decided to open only on Fridays and Saturdays in resort area where the market was only showing on weekends, and renegotiate some financial commitments. And this, you probably know about some also condotel operation. We have one condotel operation. We had to also readapt our commitments. Now, next slide. So as mentioned, we had to either downsize our operation, close, operate as per the demand market requirements, means trying to keep our hotels showing either profit or avoid any losses. And that was a decision taken to make us still alive and still able to face the future. So we have also considered a lot of development on the domestic market. And we are working now on developing ecosystems between all the different branches within our groups. And it's going live in next month in December. Okay, I hope that case was interesting for as a base case for resilience of hospitality company, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anton. And lastly, we'll have Dr. Bukhar Sraj, the professor from RMIT University, that will provide us a very academic point of view on why Vietnam is so resilient comparing to other countries. Dr. Bukhar.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for giving me the chance to share some of my thoughts on, why Vietnam is remarkable in its trajectory over the first half of the year. And I hope it's not so academic as you said. Let me start by saying that the pandemic is probably three times worse than the global financial crisis in 2008. So we are actually talking about a very serious, perhaps structural, what we call an exogenous shock to the world economy, right? So we're talking about something very serious. And then if you look at the latest forecasts from the International Monetary Fund, the overall GDP in the world this year will shrink by around 5%. Advanced economies, the US and Europe, obviously, and Australia, they do much worse than that, probably shrink around 8%, whereas developing emerging markets shrink by around 3%. Vietnam sort of like shines, right? Vietnam is growing at around 2.5% this year. And can you put on the next slide, please? Thank you. And this growth is often explained, you know what, in Vietnam, COVID did not happen, right? For some reason, there's some good, typically we hear two types of explanations. One is like, okay, the policy, that the government enacted was, very fast. They have, because of governmental structures, the ability to track and trace very easily. Or we hear explanations of, that are more sort of like sociological explanations, that it's easy that people wear face masks and people are scared and they don't go out as easy and so forth. So actually, the overriding explanations that we hear that COVID didn't really happen, but I don't think this is a good explanation at all. And in the next 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I wanted to first show you why that is not a good explanation. And I offer a different explanation for Vietnam by looking actually at the corporate fabric of Vietnam, right? So why, let's say that COVID did not happen in Vietnam. Why is that not a good explanation? Number one, we should not forget that, Vietnam is the world champion in trade, right? It has the highest trade intensity in the world, right? So it's like Vietnam trades 2 times its GDP. The next best country would be Belgium, right? There are a couple of very small countries that have higher trade intensities, and these are usually very small countries that are, but so for sizable companies, Vietnam is world champion in trade, and obviously it's therefore exposed to global supply chains like no one else. And obviously is therefore also for international sort of demand, is sort of like what's happening outside of Vietnam. The second point is, the average GDP in last year in Vietnam was $2,700, whereas the world average is $11,000. Now, as I just said, the world is decline. The world GDP is declining by around 5%. So this would have had a bigger impact on Vietnam than, so if it's 5% of 11,000, if you that would have a very big impact on the 2,700 GDP in Vietnam. So it would be very strongly affected. And finally, McKinsey has found that actually brick and mortar economies, and this is actually probably going back to what Claude and Colin kind of also sort of found, brick and mortar economies are much more affected by the pandemic than the new economy, sort of digitally transformed business models. And obviously in Vietnam, we are talking about agriculture, we're talking about textile, we're talking about manufacturing, not so much about the service industry. So all these three big points will actually speak to this. Vietnam should have gone through this pandemic and end up in very bad shape, but it didn't, right? So can we have the next slide, please? And we see stories, right? And I think I've been here also for now 10 years, and we see a lot of stories. Here is, I like the story of VinFast, right? VinFast, basically just thinking about what should we do with our second manufacturing line for cars, which is a shiny new production line. And if you look at the date, April 4, this is a new, a news clip in April 4, which is essentially a month or 6 weeks after kind of the pandemic became official. They said, okay, look, we don't produce cars, but we produce ventilators here, right? Could you imagine, a German company doing this? Probably not, right? Or any other larger company. So we have the largest firm being incredibly agile, right? We have seen, probably you read about pink burgers that, the pink buns. So the KFC buys burger buns that were made with dragon fruit. The dragon fruit customers in China didn't buy them. It's a perishable good. So the bakers have used the dragon fruits to bake burger buns, right? We have seen the rapid transformation of Vietnam's textile industry towards becoming the world's face mask factory, right? So incredible sort of little anecdotes that we see, and in the next slide, I want to sort of advance three potential reasons why this is the case. Why is Vietnam doing so well, and why do we see these great examples of agility and resilience, right? The first explanation that I would like to advance is that obviously the Vietnamese firms have lower financial debt levels, and if you do business in Vietnam, you have experienced that. The first, why do they have lower levels than perhaps in other countries? And even we're talking about Southeast Asia, is because there's the access to debt markets or debt instruments for Vietnamese firms is basically almost closed. So getting funding, debt financing for your firm is very, very difficult. So there's a much lower leverage ratio for Vietnamese firms than in other countries around the world. And then second one, should you get debt, should you be able to access debt markets, the cost of your debt is very high, right? It's much higher than even our neighboring countries and so forth. So the real interest rate is very high. So this means that we have lower leverage, which means we have lower sort of deterministic cash flow appointments, so to speak, that, sort of no interest rate payments, even if things are bad, which is a good thing in times of, when cash doesn't come in, right? So that's the good news. So we have lower financial debt levels in Vietnam than basically anywhere in the world. The second point, and this is also what we experience every day, the governance of society here in Vietnam, but firms in particular, is based on relationships. If you divide the world into governance systems, right, we can think about the contract-based societies and firms, and the relationship-based societies and firms. Right, and Vietnam is clearly in the sort of relationship-based corner, where we hire without a contract. We hire people, trust, because people work for the average SME because they trust, they don't need a contract. There's no things like KPI. It's called commitment in Vietnam, right? And so we have a very different system of running firms. And this is a good thing. So we in Vietnam, the average SME may not have, may have contracts, but there are very few of them. And obviously, when we have these exogenous shocks like a pandemic, we need to change the process, and changing the process when you have contracts in place is very difficult, right? So there are lots of books about change management and how you do that. But in relationship-based governance systems, like in Vietnam, changing processes is very easy. It's like you tell your marketing guy to be actually a delivery driver tomorrow, right? So, I think that's the second advantage of Vietnam, sort of, and maybe a sort of underlying reason why Vietnam is doing well in a pandemic. And the last one is, going back to the VinFast example, there's a lot of agility sort of embedded in the culture and the mindset, right? So, and this comes also from the very, idiosyncratic history of Vietnam. It would be enough to just look at, what law Vietnam belonged to. Usually we have civil law or common law. In Vietnam, it would be a mix of both, plus a bit of Russian or communist sort of origins, and everything in between. So, and obviously, Vietnam has a very specific history of, kind of a different systems trying to, kind of overlay here in Vietnam. So, and that results in a very agile mindset, which gives this operation a flexibility. It's all right to produce ventilators instead of cars, right? So this is kind of the perfect storm for Vietnam, where we have lower financial commitments. We have the ability to increase, our execution velocity, because we have, relationship-based governance systems. And we have this sort of like operational flexibility through an agile mindset. Just as a last point, this is great for times of pandemics. All these points that Vietnam is sort of like shining right now are perhaps not desirable sort of facets of the fabric of the Vietnamese firms. Right, as we know, if you can't access financial markets, and especially debt markets, it's hard to grow your business, right? So what is good in a pandemic may not be good in long term. As we know that, we have seen the relationship-based governance firms, it's very hard to grow beyond a certain point, right? If you read, Yuval's *Sapiens*, right? It's like, when you go beyond 60 people, you have to put processes and contracts in place. So also perhaps what is good in a pandemic may not be good for the growth of the firm. And then obviously, producing ventilators after a month of, seeing the pandemic is a good thing. But in fact, isn't this strategic ambiguity for you as an investor? Do you really leverage your core competence and so forth? So is this the way to go forward? Maybe not. So but I think this will not change in the short term, right? Sort of the kind of features of the fabric of the Vietnamese economy. It will not change in the short term, but I think there are these underlying sort of structural reforms that are happening, that there will be more access to financial markets, that firms want to grow, and they will put contracts in place and run more on a sort of process and process-based governance systems, and that firms will more focus on, exploiting their core competence. And so for me, so going back, the explanation of COVID did not happen doesn't really fly. But I think, sort of the resilience and the performance of the Vietnamese economy is probably explained by these three factors, and they may stay for a while. And perhaps one last thing, the pandemic is a good example of an exogenous shock. The next thing doesn't need to be a pandemic. It could be a financial crisis. It could be a major natural event. So that's it from my side. I appreciate and I'm happy to discuss a little bit more about my and others' presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Burkhardt. That was very interesting. To me, the resilience of Vietnam economy doesn't just come from only the endeavor of the government, but also the adaptability of Vietnamese people. Like you said, a story about the dragon fruit hamburger bun, right? So
yes,
yeah, that would be very interesting. Okay, so now thank you for all the guest speaker presented your part already. So now let's move on to the third part that we will have the panel discussions, where also we'll have some questions. So to the audience, please send us your questions if you have any that we can raise to the guest speakers. So first of all, can you turn on the guest speaker? Can you turn on your video so that we can have more interactive discussions? Okay. Right. So the first question. So back to you, Mr. Claude.
Okay. I'd like to just pick up on the last presentation and the last slide. Very excellent from Burkhardt. Having lived and worked in Vietnam over 20 years, I can definitely relate to that. So the same thing that foreign investors complaining about for 20 years, for example, relationship-based rather than contractual-based business, is what saved us in the pandemic. Okay, so I'd like to ask each, because we're all businessmen that have been here for a while, each of us to give an example of that. Okay, and I'll start. When the pandemic hit, I talked with the partners at Grant Thornton. I said, look, we're probably not going to get much work for the next couple of months, so no problem. I'll go on half salary. Let's save our resources so we don't have to lay anybody off. I'll go on half salary and maybe do half as much work because there's not as much work to do. So, and they being Grant Thornton not having high debt levels and having a relationship culture. And what was the third aspect, Burkhardt? Agile mindset. All three of those applied. And so they said, sure, let's do it. No contractual, my contract didn't say that, we just did it, right? So I contacted my landlord. Actually, he contacted me. He offered me 10% off my rent. I said, well, you know, I just agreed with my firm to go on 50% off. So how about I pay 50% rent, but only for the next 3 months, and then I'll go back to 100%. And he also, not having high debt levels and having a relationship with me, I see him face to face once a week at least, and also having an agile mindset, he said, sure, nothing in our contract about it, no contractual change. We just went to 50%. So there's an example, and everybody benefited from that. 3 months later, we were back up to 100%, and nobody had to move, and nobody had to be laid off. And it was a very great way to respond and show resilience to the pandemic, that it was win-win-win. So there's an example from me, and I'd like to ask the other panelists, could you give me an example from your firm, from your business, of the resilience that you saw in Vietnam from your staff or from your business to deal with this pandemic? Rick, did you raise your hand? Go ahead.
Yeah, a great story from yours, Claude. And to be honest, I've heard that resonated with some of the team in TRG, where their landlords have turned around to them and helped them out. As an organization, what we did is is we just reached out to people and say, hey, look, you know, there is a bit of a downturn. If it hasn't hit us yet, it's going to hit us. You know, there's going to be a train wreck somewhere along this line this year. And so if people want to take some voluntary time off, if you want to take off some, you know, unpaid leave, go ahead. So everybody started doing that, but then it morphed into, let's take unpaid leave so you don't pay me, but I'll work anyway. You know, only in Vietnam, right? and you know, there's no contract for this. You just do it. You know, and that's the resilience that's actually, I think, it must be built into the DNA of the psyche of the people in this country. That's why it is so agile and so resilient. The people are, and you don't need any rules or regulations for this. People just know it's the right thing to do. Just like the floods that we've had, you know, in the center of the country. No one thinks twice of hesitating to help. Hey, if I could be up there, I'll help. I'll fill in the sandbags. You know, I will just help. This is just the way it is, and this is the underlying resilience of the Vietnamese people, and that's why we're all here, I guess. Back to you, Claude.
Thanks, Rick. Colin, please give us a story.
Yeah, just going back to Burkhardt's example there on the ventilators. So I actually had the chance to have a chat with the guy who did that at Vingroup. I was just talking with him socially back around that time, and I just said to him, you know, congratulations that you organised that. He's Vietnamese, and you know, I've noticed that I think it was General Motors had a plan to convert also car factories to ventilators, but they weren't going to produce as much as Vietnam. It was going to take them several times as long. And I said to him, you know, sort of like, great, why Vietnam? And his reply was just, oh, these Europeans, they're too slow. So from, you know, it's just accepted in Vietnam that people are spontaneous. They have this natural adaptability. You know, it doesn't always work. Sometimes people end up doing fairly random things, but certainly in a crisis, that's when you see the real strength here in Vietnam.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, let's have two more stories. Antoine, you gave us actually some examples, but maybe you could give us one more detailed example where your Vietnamese staff or colleagues were showing their resilience and their agility.
Yeah, so well, I may have a good example also in our resorts where we had to do some multitasking, as very close from what Rick experienced, where people were actually coming and having I mean, you have some waiters, even managers working as gardeners and doing some work for the renovation of the resort. And so during the weekday, they are gardeners, and the weekend, they become back managers or whether reservation staff or any other staff. They had this multitasking that they really gladly took, especially in the region of Nha Trang, where you had about 67 people who lost their jobs presently in one single city, and you can imagine what it affected. The other one is the example I was giving about the Holiday Inn, and Holiday Inn turned into a quarantine center, and we're reaching 70% occupancy and pretty good results by having a totally different way to operate this hotel. I mean, nothing to do with a classic hotel, just staff on a daily basis, because they are supposed to stay on site. They are not allowed even to go home. So we have some rooms for them, and they're paid accordingly, almost double of what they're making in a normal time and a daily basis. So everybody find their good interest in that, and it's a win-win situation between our team and the business. So it's yeah.
Burkhard, do you have any stories of agility and resilience at RMIT for us before we move on to the next question?
You got me there, right? Because we are a Australian university, and we are very much contract-based type of thing, right? So in some ways we're I don't think we have a good story of resilience, but what I guess what we do have is a good story of agility. Well, sort of like sort of in terms of governance structures, we are squarely into kind of the Anglo-Saxon governance structure, but in terms of agility, as I probably like hospitality, education was sort of like hit in the face, so to speak, because we just couldn't have face-to-face classes, which is the product, right? And so we had to switch from one day to the other. To online classes, and that speaks to your study. I think we're digital, so like on the edge of being digitally transformed, right? So we are having for years already, experimented with hybrid sort of teaching systems. We have embedded in our learning management systems the ability to do kind of Zoom calls, but actually on steroids for education, right? So you can raise hands and things like that, have breakout groups and so forth. So so I think this digital transformation, we are highly digitally transformed somehow already, or we're in the process. And that helped us to basically switch from one week to the other. And this perhaps contrasts with education organizations that are not digitally transformed, that actually just rely on this face-to-face classroom interaction uniquely, and they had problems. Basically, they couldn't teach for a semester. For us, it was just business as usual. We just stay at home and teach from home. So perhaps it's a great story that sort of undermines the kind of findings of your study, that on the spectrum of how much did you digitize your processes would affect the would affect the impact of the pandemic. And we are clearly on one end of the spectrum, where we would say, look, we are fully digital. We prefer to be face to face, but we can do it otherwise. And so there's a lot of agility in our process, and that helped us. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Burkhard. Okay, we have a few good questions from some of the participants. Josephine, you've submitted two great ones here. Let me just read them out. The first one is, I think, to all panelists, that the Burkhard's model of the 3 plus points that helped get us through the pandemic can also have a negative downside compared to international business standard. So the question is, how do you balance in between? Could any of the panelists share your thoughts about how you can be agile and how you can be relationship-based, but not forget about contractual obligations and structure? Anybody want to have a crack at that?
Maybe I just say that this is really the key question. That's really a difficult question to ask. And if you, from my perspective, I think the march towards a more contract-based business environment is sort of like, you can't stop it, right? So it's sort of like an exogenous fact, because there are some very fundamental drivers of competition in the world. For example, scale. You need scale to be competitive around the world, and to reach that scale, you can't sort of like run your farm with your friends and family, right? So I think to I think it's sort of like not really a decision that entrepreneurs make, So I think it's sort of like coming from somewhere, and you have to make the best out of it. But my projection would be that actually in the long run, there will be a convergence somehow between the Vietnamese model, if you want, and the more Anglo-Saxon model in terms of governance. That actually, I think many if you go, many companies that even in the US got hit quite seriously, that with high financial debt ratios, right? So there will be a rethinking of what optimal debt levels are and so forth. But I think the pendulum will go towards the Anglo-Saxon model. And I think, but that being said, I think the key of sort of like, if you go to the Anglo-Saxon model, which seems to be an imperative, how do you remain resilient within that model? And I don't have a good answer for that. And I think maybe Claude's study would sort of help us to understand, digital transformation is very important and so forth. So this is from my side. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to take a crack at that question? The balance between the Vietnamese business culture and the international business culture and the transition and how that impacts resilience? I would just say the role of the intermediary, maybe myself being one. Once you've been here 20 years and I can speak Vietnamese and understand the local culture and can explain to foreign investors what the Vietnamese, how they may be looking at it, explain to Vietnamese how foreign investors may be looking at it. I think that can play an important role in finding the balance. Josephine, you had another, yeah, go ahead, Rick.
Let me jump in on this.
Please.
So I guess the concern is that we need, maybe from the Western world, they like sticking to the letter of the contract. Okay. And how does this mesh with the, it's not, I don't call it a Vietnamese world, it's the world that we now live in, whether you like it or not. I mean, the pandemic is hitting all of us. I always, I always liken it to what's the right thing to do? Because at the end of the day, it's not a matter of what the letter of the law is, which may be a very Western thing, but it's also what is the right thing to do? Okay. Do we not lend out a helping hand because it's not in the contract? Okay. And, at the end of the day, if we're a service organization, it is all about customer service. All right. And I'm a great believer of, when crises hit, when times get hard, then you know who your friends are. It is a bit of a quid pro quo. So as I look at our global customers, and different countries are hit by the pandemic differently, I'm an accountant, okay, by training. And the old joke used to be, when you don't pay someone, the check's in the post. Okay, you can't do that anymore because we don't use checks. So the new joke, okay, during the pandemic is, sorry, I can't pay you because the office is in lockdown and we can't get to our accounting records. So this is an example of digital immaturity, where out there in the world that some people aren't digitally mature enough and they can't actually get at their records because their physical office is physically closed and they can't actually get to them. They can't get to the check or the token that they use to make a payment. All right. And there are organizations out there who can't pay their customers or their suppliers because they just can't. All right. Now, I'd say from a Vietnamese company perspective, we might say, yeah, we understand that. So when your office opens again, pay us. Okay, that's one level. Let's look at it at another level. A lot of organizations are putting their people on shift work, 50%, only 50% of the office in, or they're only working a certain number of days a week. Okay, and I have seen with a lot of these organizations elsewhere in the world that on certain days, they're just not available. They really do stick to that. Hey, I'm at home, I don't have to work, so I'm not going to do it. All right. Whereas in Vietnam, I'm seeing the reaction is, okay, that customer doesn't work on those 2 days a week. However, if no one is looking at what their systems and looking after them, they're going to have a problem. And I know it's not in our contract to do that, but we'll just reach out to them and offer to do it for free anyway, because it's the right thing to do. And again, this is the mindset of the Vietnamese people. And it doesn't have to be in the contract, just like, you know, to take your pay cut and your landlord, it doesn't have to be in writing. We just do it. It's the right thing to do. And when those customers and when those organizations come out of the pandemic, out on the other side, they will remember who helped them. Just like you and all the companies that you work with, and maybe you are asking your landlord for a cut or whatever, you remember the ones who helped you, and you will remember the ones who did not help you.
Thanks, Rick. I think can't be better advice than that. Do the right thing. Okay, I've got at least two more questions to get through before we have the closing presentation. So another one from you, Josephine. Excellent question to Colin. Thanks very much. Great sharing about outsourcing automation, but it comes with cost. Very high, and maintaining it even higher for a small company to survive. This is rather tough. Do you have suggestions how to achieve the results at affordable cost? Colin?
Yes, well, there's some good news on this one, actually. So it was true enough, even a couple of years ago, that outsourcing or automating something was slow, it was expensive. But the new generation of technology coming through means that small companies can literally just take things off the shelf, and they're already best-in-class systems, and just apply them straight off. So typically in any company, your processes won't be so different and unique that nobody in the world has ever encountered this before. So you go, you know, you've got thousands of options out there, and there are going to be ones that are already good enough fit for you. And these are literally software as a service, or loads of companies out there willing to outsource things who have done it 1,000 times before. And it's not expensive, it's not slow. I'll give you an example from Vietnam. I was talking to someone who had founded a company recently in Vietnam, and the founder was talking to me saying, oh, they need to do this particular one where they have a field sales force, and they need to track them using mobile phones and support them with the right information and a whole load of systems. And they described it, and I said, wait a second, I was just talking to a software firm that does exactly that. They have something that, you know, they could load up on your mobile phone immediately. And the lady said, actually, we found someone in Vietnam who, yes, has that exactly that service you've just described. And I said, great. I mean, that was very lucky for you. You know, some people would have told you that to implement something like that would have taken months and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the founder said, well, you know, I was smarter than that. I was able to find a plug and play one. And I said, well, just hypothetically, if a software company had tricked you and persuaded you that it was going to take 6 months and they had to customize and build something from scratch for your solution, you know, what would you have done if you had found out a few months in that they'd been lying to you and that there was something easy and cheap available all the way that was actually better? And the founder said, yeah, of course, I would have strangled them. So, but, you know, you can find these solutions. There are so many of them out there. It's like putting together Lego blocks. They already exist. It's just deploying this new generation of technology, which is just generations faster, cheaper, everything. It's, you know, very powerful. So small companies can do as much as big companies can, because it's like being democratized. So it's great news for small companies. You can really scale up using these ecosystems and approaches like that. That there is all the things, but you know, you do need someone who's honest, who will tell you the correct answer on that, because there's too many companies out there. It's a matter of ethics, I suppose, where they will tell you, you know, that it's all so complicated, and that's their business model. They're going to make a lot of money out of that, but it's not the solution you need. So, you know, do check on those new generations of technology, and as an SME, there's excellent news out there for you. It is all very possible these days.
Thanks, Colin. So that's a little bit of a plug for vendor neutral consultants, rather than selecting your solution directly from the vendor, who of course just has an interest in selling you something. Okay, so let's move on to we have a really interesting question here. We haven't talked about this yet. from Peter Sorensen, appreciates, again, the model about relationships and agility, and notes the flip side is scalability. So while the economy is still growing at 2%, do we foresee an increase in inequality? So we haven't talked about the impact on income inequality and wealth inequality in Vietnam. Do we see an increase as a result of the pandemic? And do we see any negative long-term consequences because of this? Would anybody like to have a crack at that? Colin, go ahead, please.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that one. So I'm doing a lot at the moment with the World Bank and UN on assisting disadvantaged people and vulnerable workforces. So one of the downsides of rapid change and transformation is that the most vulnerable people are affected first. So it's not just in Vietnam, but globally, you do see this where there is big income disparities as the people who understand transformation and can take advantage of it do extremely well, people, companies, countries. And those who are kind of blindsided by it are the most vulnerable and they suffer the most. So this is an issue more generally for society, governments and others of how to cushion that. Vietnam, though, it does better than most because it is more resilient, because it is more adaptive. You get more people not being too badly affected. But as the rules change very quickly, you also get the opportunity suddenly being equalized as well. So for example, for remote working, I have a lot of, let's say, people with disabilities here in Vietnam who now have job opportunities because remote working is more accepted. So they would have had difficulties coming physically into an office and they didn't have university degrees. But the new jobs don't take university degrees and they can be done remotely. So although they're the most vulnerable and the first to lose traditional jobs, they can also be first in line to get the new economy jobs as well. Oh, Claude, you're on mute.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Colin. Yeah, so we have to end the panel session, move on to the wrap up, but there are two more questions that we didn't address. One is face-to-face coming back, both in business and in shopping? The other question is about the guidelines for managing work from home. So we'll find some other way to address those questions later. Maybe we'll have a follow-up webinar because these discussions are really interesting. But now let's please return to the presentation for the last two wrap-up sessions. Okay, I just wanted to very quickly, just a few minutes to go through the recommendations. And even before we had the data, we prepared in anticipation about 20 recommendations for companies. And then, but we only gave the recommendation if it really made sense depending on their data. Remember those charts I showed you, each individual company versus their industry? And we came up with this. Next slide, please. So the most common recommendation was that the online sales channel needed a push. I think companies still don't realize how much they can sell online compared to through their traditional channels. And there's lots of tools and techniques and methods to boost your online sales. So there's a recommendation that most companies, not all, can really dig into. Next slide, please. The second most common recommendation was to protect business from cyber attacks. It's known that these pick up during the pandemic, and just in the last week we had two here, both of which were thwarted, like phishing attacks. But basically, you need to take it more seriously and make sure you don't lose even more ground because of cyber attacks. Next slide, please. Okay, we found quite common that people had supply problems, usually when they had only one or two suppliers, okay? And sometimes companies think there's not much they can do about it. They're beholden to their supplier, but then they find out if the supplier is overseas and there's no more import, or if they're domestic and it's disrupted because of the pandemic, they need to really look and see if there is some way to have alternative suppliers available. Next slide, please. Okay, then we also work from home. Definitely a lot of companies stumbled on this. They were scrambling, sending people home, and productivity took a hit. So there's ways, for example, providing the right work from home tools and training people in those tools and other techniques to make work from home more effective. Next slide, please. And we had lots of more recommendations, but the fifth most common one was IT security, not only cyber attacks, but overall, please invest in your IT security, maybe do an IT audit, an IT security audit to see where your weaknesses are and then address them. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're just about done. Just going to take the last minute to just introduce our services. Some of these services are actually meant to address those recommendations that we made in the pandemic diagnostic. Next slide, please. Okay, so we have digital transformation services, and I always think, you know, like Rick and Colin and Grant Thornton would be a dynamite combination for a company that wanted to start their digital transformation journey or move it up to the next level. But there are a lot of vendors out there, and please talk with them and find one that you're comfortable with and suitable for you, and do a little bit of investment in your digital transformation. Our next service is digital marketing and sales to give you that boost and push. I myself have a lot of experience of that at TMO, where we had a question at a previous webinar, what percentage should be traditional marketing, what should be digital? And then if digital, which channels of digital? And that, of course, completely depends on what your product is, what your service is, and who your customers are. But at TMO, we started out about 20/80, and we ended up almost 100% digital marketing. Our next service is digital HR. So I think Colin also has a lot to offer there, and we can partner on that for companies that are setting up a new operation or digitizing existing operations and need to attract talent and manage talent in a new agile way, that they don't lose talent of people who are used to working digitally and not in their traditional way. Another service we have is IT audit and your digital governance and your digital risk management. If you're not sure your IT is working at full efficiency, please call us in to just do an audit. It's not that complicated. There's great methodologies and frameworks like the COBIT framework, where we can evaluate your IT operation or your IT project and let you know where it can be strengthened. Another service that we offer, once you have decided to start your digital journey, you need some solutions to be designed and then the vendors to be selected. And then during the project, you need quality assurance, which is on your side. So not from the vendor, but the consultant will be on your side to help you manage the vendor. Grant Thornton available for that as well. We also offer digital security services, either with partner firms in the region. We have very strong Grant Thornton security teams in Australia and Poland. We also have local partners like TRG here in Vietnam, who can come in and really help you tighten up your security. Once you start your digital journey, you'll soon find out that if you're adding too many new digital applications and solutions and systems, you need an architecture to make sure they all play together and share the same data and work together seamlessly and smoothly. And lastly, I think it's been pointed out, digital transformation is data. So for analytics and business intelligence and for dashboards, you can start at a very simple level. We can design some dashboards for you to keep track of the most important things in your business, to get started on really making your company a data-driven company, which, as Rick pointed out, will make it much more resilient. Okay, so it's 11 o'clock. Thanks everybody for your attention. I think this was a very 26 people stuck with us to the end. I think this was a very interesting webinar. Thanks everybody for participating, and we hope to see you again real soon.
Thank you for your participation. If you have any questions, please send us via email grant.thornton@vn.gt.com so that we can answer your questions or for any follow-up. Thank you very much.